members is not present, members are permitted to attend. Physical quorum of members aren't physically present. I'll entertain a motion to permit those members not physically present due to okay, I have a motion by member Rutledge, second by member Childress. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, the motion carry. Welcome members LaPlante. And do we have anybody else online? Okay. Could we have a roll call, please? Here.
Yes.
Here.
She's here. Yeah. Here. Okay, thank you. It's been a little, quite some time since our last meeting, so I just wanted to provide a brief update on the committee's progress. In our August meeting, we reached a significant milestone by approving an 18-month contract with Grounded Solutions Network for the For Every One Home program. This partnership is pivotal as Grounded Solutions will be lending their expertise and to assist the county in technical support and consulting services, all aimed at increasing production of affordable housing. In today's meeting, we have a nice agenda lined up where we'll hear from experts in the financial sector. Our guests are, we have James Gray, Managing Director of Quarrance and Rose International. We have Jonathan Spencer with Twindy Investment Group, Rick Herrig with Legacy Resources, and Allison Laff with TED Business and the City of Naperville. So your presence and participation in today's meeting and discussion are greatly appreciated as we continue our effort to address the important issue of affordable housing in our community. And Member Tornatore, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
Just that I want to thank everybody. We're getting some traction in the community regarding this. We get some emails and interesting comments as to what's going on. And also, we've got another $2.5 million in the new budget for this. So it's going to kick us up $5 million, which is going to give us, I think, an even stronger bite in the market. So thanks to all of you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, with that, do we have any public comment this morning? Okay, so we cannot approve the minutes right now because we do not have a quorum. So we'll have to hold off on those and approve those probably at our next meeting, correct? Okay, so we move on to item number 6, our finance discussion and local government. I should put my glasses on. And local government project insights. So our first presenter is going to be James Gray. So do you want to come up and
All right, so this is James Gray. I'm Jonathan Spencer. James is an architect and a principal at Cornice and Rose. They develop projects. I'm a principal investor in real estate, and we work together on a number of projects. So we kind of work as a team in that sense. And what I want to do today is give you guys just a bit of a view through a developer or an investor's lens, how you finance a project from getting entitlements all the way through to occupancy. And then just highlighting the uncertainties, the key constraints, what are the roadblocks that really prevent a project from getting a green light when someone in my shoes takes a look. And then kind of leading from there, we'll look at some of the financing solutions that are available and perhaps some of the gaps and challenges that remain. So do you want to add anything?
Just that Rick Herrig is joining us via Zoom as well online.
Wonderful. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, we can talk through some of the technical Fannie Mae products and so on that are available. I'll defer to James on some of those. He's a little more familiar with the nuts and bolts. But without any further intro, let's go for it. So it works. So this is we'll start with a bit of a macro view. You know, since US construction just hasn't kept up with household formation, and that's particularly true since 2008. You know, a lot of home builders went out of business. A lot of people were just too afraid after 2008, and there's other challenges as well that have made that difficult on the entitlement front and so on. We also have very high interest rates at the moment. Everyone knows that, with mortgage rates close on 8% now. And what's interesting is your transactions on existing homes, it's really the mirror image of interest rates. And so when interest rates are very high, everyone's got a 30-year mortgage locked in and nobody's going to move unless they absolutely have to. So it's a very difficult time to be a starter at the moment, because you know you're not going to get too much new construction, and existing home sales are just not, you know, existing homes are simply not for sale. So this chart, I don't know if you can see, but we're going back to like 1950, and you can see some record low US home vacancy rates and US rental vacancy rates. So we really do have a shortage of homes in the US. And, you know, on a countrywide basis, it's roughly, this is a housing affordability index. It's roughly twice as difficult to own a home versus 10 years ago. And the Midwest, I think the Midwest is appealing in that it is a little more affordable than some of the crazy hot markets, and still good job opportunities, but it's no exception as far as the trend. Definitely harder to own a home nowadays. And then looking at housing affordability, this is the Elgin area from the National Wells Fargo Housing Opportunity Index. And what you see, median house prices straight up, median income just up 45%, but affordability down 31%. And then looking at the Chicago, Naperville, Evanston area, we see a similar trend. So that just sort of sets the backdrop. This is why it matters. I think, you know, housing is a big part of quality of life, and it comes down to delivering desirable units at the end of the day. Now, when we look at things, there's really different phases of a project. Each phase has a different risk associated with it. And when you've got a lot of uncertainty, that'll impact the type of financing that's appropriate to address that specific need. So in the beginning of a project, you have a whole lot of risks, because number one, your question is, can I acquire the parcels? So typically a large listed home builder might be dealing with farmland. In that case, what they're going to do is option the land. A farmer will be quite happy if he knows he's going to get more from housing than from farming. He'll option that quite happily. With infill projects, it can be a little bit more difficult, because if you have a home, you've got your lifestyle constraints all tied up in your home. You might not be willing to option your house. And so an infill developer for a small project might actually have to purchase property right off the bat. And what you have there is then they're faced with all the risks of, can I get this entitled? Can I get the horizontal infrastructure done on time, on budget? Will I be able to get construction done on time and on budget? And if I'm successful with all of that, will I be able to get the units constructed on time and on budget? And if I'm lucky enough to have won on all of those phases, has the market moved? It's probably now years since I did my Excel spreadsheet, and rates could be way higher or way lower. Prices can be completely different. The price of lumber could be through the roof. So you've got those kinds of risks. I mean, if you've ever renovated a bathroom, not a lot of people can do that on time and on budget. I know about that. And then there's the ownership piece, which is, you know, just getting things refinanced and sold off. And so there's different equity that's appropriate at each stage. In the beginning, you're looking at typically equity if it's an infill. Like I said, if it's farmland, it could be landowner financing where they just sort of option a property or that kind of thing. When it comes to entitlements, the thing about entitlements is it's very binary in terms of the outcome. So if you think something like construction costs, well, if it goes well, maybe you're 10% under budget. If it goes really badly, maybe you're 20% over budget. But but you still have economics. When it comes to entitlements, it can absolutely kill a project and you can lose 100% of your invested capital. And so right until you've got your entitlements, you need to use equity. There's no ways you can use debt. If anyone does use debt, you can probably be sure that that debt is secured against that investor's house or brokerage account. And who wants to play that game? So it's a very challenging time kind of early in a project. Once you get entitlements, uncertainty drops quite a bit, but it's still significant. And there's various products that are available. Still generally requires a lot of equity though, especially with financial conditions tightening a bit. You're probably not going to get a non-recourse loan anymore to do horizontal development. And then I'd say it's a lot easier once you get to the construction phase. You can do things in phases, but it's still significant capital. So just a way of looking at risk is that generally risks are multiplicative. So an investor, if you think let's say you've got an 80% chance of acquiring all the lots, that there's no holdout in the middle of your project. And if you're lucky enough to come right there, maybe you've got a pretty good chance of getting entitlements, 80%. So that's cool. And then you've got to, go through this whole exercise that I've described. You now have your chance of success, in generally speaking, is going to be 80% times 80% times 80% times 80%, which is 0.26%. So it takes a brave man to do these kinds of projects. And the way investors and developers deal with this is they try and commit as little capital early on as possible, and then they commit more capital towards the end when the probability of success is higher. But the challenge there is you still have to get the project across the line. Infrastructure still has to happen, entitlement still has to happen. This is another kind of graphical way of looking at it. Uncertainty is highest in the beginning and then drops down, particularly after entitlements, and then comes gradually down. And then your capital at risk, if you think about it, the most challenging time in a project is when you've got the maximum uncertain capital at risk. So if you look at this chart, construction, there's a lot of capital at risk. but it's probably not the most uncertain capital at risk. The most uncertain capital at risk is probably in the entitlements or horizontal infrastructure phase. And so that's often a key challenge for developers. The role of density, I think one thing that you just want to be aware of is, you know, everyone likes a lot of green space as a resident, but when it comes down to doing the numbers, if you've got fixed cost for land, fixed cost for entitlements and horizontal infrastructure, if you don't have sufficient density, what happens is your fixed cost per unit could make a project just uneconomic. So if in this example, just illustrative numbers, if you've got lower density, 75 units on 10 acres, you could have 150K in terms of fixed cost per unit. And that might not be sufficient to make the project a green light project. So to sum up the key challenges, I would say that entitlements is often a key challenge, horizontal infrastructure, and then number 3 is absorption and affordability. So just a note there, when a developer looks further out and they may be doing a big farmland development, yes, they can get their land a little cheaper, they can get things optioned because it's farmland, get their entitlements. But the problem there is that they're way down 88. And so absorption becomes the challenge. Can they sell enough homes quickly enough, because it's also time value of money, to make it work? There's various financing mechanisms, each with pros and cons. We can talk briefly through some of these. I would say something to just keep in mind: in equity and secured lending is essentially the same thing, because the developer has to bring their balance sheet to the party. When landowner financing, you can include options there. We've kind of described. Farmers might be keen on this, but it's difficult to get a private individual to say, sure, let's constrain my lifestyle. There are private lenders, private credit is a whole industry now. It's there's a lot of lending that happens through private credit funds. And you can sometimes, I mean, a couple of years ago, you could get horizontal infrastructure financed with a non-recourse loan. Those interest rates are going to be quite high. So again, that's a challenge, because you're still a long ways from cash flow at that stage. So a high interest rate for a couple of weeks is no problem, but a high interest rate for an extended period could definitely kill a project. Special service areas, I don't know if you guys are all familiar with what those are. We can discuss that. But essentially what you're doing is the local government is writing the infrastructure check, and then it's becoming a property tax kind of payback period. And the challenge with that is that it requires more administration. I think the way, if I was in your shoes, the way I would think about a grant or a budget is like, if you need an individual, a full-time staff member for, let's say, 60K every year to manage a budget or a line item, that kind of, you need quite a bit of capital to pay for that. So it might be like, if you think about it like an endowment, if you're getting 10% return, you need $6 million, 10% return, and that pays for the additional administration. And I think what you want is administrative efficiency with the solutions that you go for. There is a thing called LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And the challenge with LIHTC is, number one, it's a low income housing tax credit. So low income, typically 80% of median income or less, whereas affordable could be up to 120% of median income. But the challenge is with free money is it's generally hard to get. There's a lot of competition for LIHTC. You can also do grants, and that can be designed any way you like. I think something I would think about is trying to make the bottlenecks, alleviate bottlenecks. And so if you do an amount per affordable housing unit at the horizontal infrastructure phase, that kind of thing, I mean, the amounts of placeholders, but that kind of thing can go a long way in helping a project become a success. Construction loans, there's you get these HUD 221D4 loans. Those other loans actually belong on the following page. The challenge with these loans is they have to be at prevailing wage, and depending on the location, that can make a project uneconomic. And then you've got various occupancy loans. Obviously, once you've got a project stabilized and there's people living there, people paying rent, then debt becomes appropriate. And these kinds of loans, they're by no means a silver bullet, but they do give a slightly lower interest rate than you would get at the market. They're non-recourse, which, you know, is nice, but at the same time, it's not the highest risk part of a project either. And then, you know, people do get creative as far as rent to own and loan assistance and for qualifying individuals. But I think doing the incentive work on the back end of a project comes with an administrative premium, because now you've got, you know, potentially hundreds of people that you're engaging with. And that's pretty much the end of it. Any questions? Yes.
Typically, does the developer own the project and then sell the condos to everybody, and does he retain any ownership, or does he just sell it and back out? How does that work?
All of those.
Okay.
So
They can do anything.
You typically, I mean, rent to own is build to rent is attractive. What's nice about build to rent is, in an environment like the current environment, it might be very difficult to get a whole bunch of buyers lining up when interest rates are crazy high, but it won't be hard to find people that need a home. And so rentals, your absorption might be better, can lower the risk. So people can do it as an apartment development. You can have instances where one developer does the building part, gets it stabilized, and then they sell it to a more of a manager who specializes in managing units as well.
Umbrella, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Got a little experience, flipped houses for 3 years with my husband. We were very successful until his untimely death, unfortunately. But so the person that puts all the money on the table for this is always the last one to get paid. So I guess what I'm asking is, are there protections through government money to acquire these properties that make that risk a little lower for you guys? And then my other question too is, what's your sweet spot? Where do you want to, what do you want to build that's going to hit the quickest amount of buyers? And, you know, I suppose for you guys, workforce development, you don't,
Right.
It's like, can I make money on this? Not so
Yeah.
much, can we rent all of
Yeah.
these out? So.
I mean, I don't know of any government programs that just give you money and pay you first. I'm still looking for
If you
that.
don't ask, you don't get, right?
That's why we're here. I think a sweet spot for us is probably a 5 to 10 acre project. And I think it's just looking at demographics. When you look at the shortage of homes, we're not trying to build 5,000 square foot homes, because I don't think that's what you'll have to look a little harder to find those buyers. And it's just not what America needs. I think the smaller units appeal both to the millennial cohort, which is a big cohort demographically, and they appeal to the boomers and the retirees, and that's a big a big cohort. I think a lot of folks as well enjoy units that are just lock up and go as well.
If I could add one more question to that. So if we've got $5 million that we're pushing towards that, can we use some of those funds to lower the risk on developers?
I think we can use the funds for pretty much, I mean, anything that we want, any project that we want to use them on, and for pretty much, I think, anything that we want. Is there somebody from finance here, or, I mean, within, housing guide, is that correct? I mean, Sam, that's what I thought we could use it pretty much for investment in these projects. And
so, yeah, the idea would be that this exercise right now is informational. At some point, the staff will bring back to this group some ideas and some concepts that are holistic. They include anywhere from land banks, where the county puts land into land banks, either through our clean and lean program by foreclosure, or by buying property and putting it into our program, or taking county owned land right now that is owned, residual land that the county has gotten from stormwater, from transportation, or from public works. We would put those in and then offer those properties to the general public for workforce housing if they meet a certain criteria. And so some of that money that has been allocated right now could be used to purchase properties. Some of that money could be used for infrastructure costs. Some of that money could be used for low interest loans. So it could be used for a myriad of things, but we would have to develop the program first. So there's no idea that's off the table at this point.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have member Gus and then member Ozog.
Thank you very much. I've been in the real estate industry for over 25 years, so I've seen the ebb and flow all the way through with the interest rates and the market and the values and everything. And right now we have an overabundance of apartments. And it seems like that is the way in which the millennials were going. But now they want to transition into something they own, right? Because we all know ownership provides equity and it increases your worth. And so what I am seeing is that the rental rates are so extremely high that they don't have an opportunity to save money to put down on anything, even a like a starter home or a duplex or a condo, anything along those lines. So you're in the industry, and I'm wondering if you have seen anything on the governmental spectrum that is going to be able to maybe move forward, where there will be some funds available for those first-time home buyers for a down payment to be able to get into ownership. Number one, we used to have it years ago. I think it was maybe the Bush administration. I can't remember one of them, but then it kind of went to the wayside. It was a good program. There were some tweaks that needed to be corrected, which I think they learned from, which might really be a benefit moving forward. So that's the number one thing. I know construction costs are up, interest rates are up, and our inventory is low. And so what does that do? That jacks the prices up. You guys obviously see it in your business. I see it in my business. The more we can get built and into the inventory, the more that market price is going to stabilize.
Right.
So
I mean, I think so renting is unaffordable, but it's at the moment with mortgage rates where they are, it's still preferable if you were just doing an apples to apples. So I think the solution is, as you say, it's more units. That's the only thing that's going to make housing sustainably lower cost and more affordable. Yeah, you do get various, like people do get creative with rent to own programs and things like that. But the challenge there is it's just a whole lot to administer. So you just want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you kind of like starting a nonprofit. You wouldn't want to start a nonprofit and then have most of the funds go to administration. You want to make sure that you're getting bang for your buck and it's efficient.
And I think IHTA is a specific. So with regard to that, IHTA, Illinois Housing and Development Authority, does have some different programs that work with that whole concept of the down payment component. You know, again, there's quite a bit of criteria. It's a pretty high bar that has to be achieved. But you know, the good thing in speaking, you know, from having been in the business as long as you have, but it does go in cycles, right? So I think the critical thing that we see is that it's really important to do things at a level. So you're adding to the housing stock in such a way, because things can last a long time. You know, you build something, the structures we build today, I mean, they can easily last 300 years. I mean, that's not a stretch. So if you build something, you build it well, then chances are it may go through some different cycles throughout the course of the lifetime of that structure. So whether it starts out as rental or as it starts out as a for sale product, I think as long as it's built in such a way that it could accommodate either, then as you go through those cycles, and you certainly see that more so in urban areas because the density allows that. But I think you see it in the suburban areas as well. And I think the reality is we have more people, you know, living, and the population becomes greater, and density, you know, per square mile, you know, per acre, however you want to do the calculations, as that increases, then those aspects need to be accommodated. So hopefully that helps to answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Guston. Member Ozog?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You particularly piqued my interest when you talked about special service areas. And I'm just making this as a general observation, but right now, I think it was open 2 years ago in downtown Glen Ellen. We have an extremely large apartment building that was built. It was definitely a TIF, so it was taxpayer supported. It's hard to discern what the inventory is there right now. From what I know anecdotally, it is not filling up. And it's also, and again, we were talking about affordable housing. I believe it's something like $2,000 for a studio. So it's what I would call Chicago prices. And I will say this is where we need buy-in from community, because you first of all need to know your market exists. We know we have the market, but you also have to match it to the inventory that you're planning to build. And this is where I don't think that connection ever happened here, because I think it was thought to be empty nesters, or maybe people like my son who lives 2 blocks away from me, but he's not paying that kind of rent. He's in a, what I call an affordable apartment, but it's not Section 8 or anything. It's just not $2,000. And so we have to be really cautious to listen to our community, and to also be sure that we're building something that the market exists for, because at this point, this is sitting there and nobody quite knows how things are going to go. So it's a real concern in terms of, you know, I'm a taxpayer and we've invested in this building. And from what I do understand, and again, I'm not trying to step on toes with another jurisdiction, but it's caused a lot of dissension and not about who's moving in there. It's about, at this point, who's not moving in there, because you can end up with a real albatross and white elephant. So anyway, I just wanted to, if you guys want to look into the situation in Glen Ellen, you can Google it, but it's a real challenge, and it was fought tooth and nail by a large segment of the community. And unfortunately, it appears that their concerns were very legitimate. So
Thank you.
If
Yeah.
I could just.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if I could just speak to that for a moment. So you touched on a very interesting point. And it's actually an interesting double-edged sword. Because certainly the market is going to dictate it. And, at some point, the market is going to speak, with regard to that project and other projects. And certainly we're seeing the market speak to the commercial real estate office market currently, right? The market is speaking and unfortunately the government's being very helpful with regard to that process. But the other edge of the sword is, specifically to your point, there's the different agency lending organizations, which when workforce housing or affordable housing is mentioned, typically, one of the HUD or Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae, often they're involved. And so even as recently as yesterday, I was getting the recent data for Fannie Mae. And so you can go and you can see in DuPage County exactly what the AMI is, average median income, which is call it $109,000, give or take change. And then it's 80% of that. And then that'll dictate exactly what that rental level will be for the maximum amount for a 1-bedroom, maximum amount for a 2-bedroom, maximum amount for a 3-bedroom.
And this is completely private, so there's none of that
Right.
involved. So,
But to that point of how this gets financed, you're kind of, the interesting aspect, not to get too far into the weeds, or overextend the amount of time that we're allowed to speak, keeping everyone too long here on a beautiful day. But there's not a square footage requirement per unit that works with that same amount. So there's a little bit of disconnect, because when we talk about high construction cost, and then we talk about this cap, there's a little bit of a disconnect there as well. The good news is that those agency organizations are in place. They're open for business. I think the number I heard yesterday was something like 40 billion that they still have left that they're not going to be, allocating this year. And pretty much every year they always allocate all their funds. So we're in an interesting stage with regard to that.
I do want to point out one last thing too. When you talk about interest rates, 37 years ago, my husband and I bought our house at 10.25. I know someone who bought a house in 1983 at 17%. So
I remember
a lot of
17%.
times a share of us remember that, unless we weren't born yet. But the point being that if people are motivated, and again, back in the 70s and 80s, there were incentives, there were help programs to assist getting into that first house, whether they were through income levels or cutting the interest rates, whatever. So that might be something that we consider as part of whatever we may, some kind of a subsidy might be something for us to consider, at least down payment, getting people's feet in the door. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Olson.
10.25.
Yeah. And I think, I keep referring back to 1212 Larkin Avenue. So we saw, I think there were like 13 different financiers, right, Mary? So, we can get creative with, how we want to do this. We could do down payment. It's open, we have a lot of options. And to your point, I think it's true, sometimes like people look at they look at interest rates on a mortgage. But to me, it's like, what can I afford? So if I can buy something with a small down payment and have an $895 payment as opposed to paying $2,000 for rent, if I can scrape up that money, that might be a better way for me to go. So I think, it's so complicated. There's so much, but I think as we bring in these great presenters and they, give us ideas of, how we're going to come up with this plan or our financing. But I think we have a lot of options. Get creative with that. So all right. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And then next up, we have Allison Laff, who's the Deputy Director, Planning and Development of TED Business Group in the City of Naperville. So welcome, Allison.
As mentioned, my name is Allison Laff. I have worked for the city for 23 years, and I oversee planning and development for the city. And today I'm going to give an overview of our Affordable Housing Incentive Program. And I'm just going to start. Oh, sorry, thank you. I'm just going to start with some background about how we got to the point of having a program. So in 2019, the city hired consultant SB Friedman to look at our existing housing stock. And just as a summary and overview of what we have, the city has largely single-family detached homes. Majority is newer housing stock that was built median year in the 80s. 75% of our houses are owner occupied, and the median home value is about $400,000. The study concluded that we have limited senior and income restricted housing options, and that approximately 20% of our homeowners and 40% of our renters are cost burdened. The study concluded that there was a significant need for owner and renter occupied affordable housing options, particularly in the area of the housing for special needs community, homeless, and veterans. Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry. So then SB Friedman went on to project what that analysis meant for the city. And they came to the conclusion that based on our housing need and need for additional affordable units, we had a need for an additional 500 units per year. Obviously big in any housing market, but considering that the city between 2010 and 2017 was averaging about 340 units a year, 500 new specifically affordable units is a tough thing for us to achieve. Especially in light of the fact that the city is approaching build out. We know that the remaining land that we have is remaining for a reason. It's either not ideal in terms of shape or floodplain. It's super expensive, doesn't have access to utilities. So we don't have this big group of land that we can work with like we used to back in the 80s. So we know that residential growth will likely need to occur through things like flipping commercial properties to residential. Redeveloping existing centers or existing low density areas with high density projects, and overall increasing density in the projects that we do undertake. I would say in the city of Naperville, for a long time, I think in about 5 years ago was our first new apartment project that we had seen in probably 20 years. So the city is very attuned to low density owner occupied residential options. So this is definitely a switch in the way that we're approaching development in the city. We had just undertaken a land use plan update about 2 years ago. And in that plan, we had talked about some different options that we could use to achieve higher densities or different type of housing units. And it was an uncomfortable discussion, I think, for our residents because it's just not what they're used to. So this is something that I think will be a slow process that we'll have to approach based on what people in the community are comfortable with, what our elected officials are interested in, and sort of just the pattern of development. We can move to the next one. Thank you. So from that overall housing assessment, the consultant came up with a list of policy options that they saw that we can undertake to achieve additional affordable housing options. They knew this was not a one size fits all. We wouldn't have one program that would all of a sudden achieve 500 new affordable units per year. So they came up with, I think it's 9 different options that our city council endorsed. And we began a work program to say what we would undertake and how. The programs with the asterisks on them are things that we're currently working on. So the first being that we're trying to sell some city-owned land for development as an age-restricted housing development for low-income residents, as well as individuals with developmental disabilities. That's actually in the works. The person that purchased or was in the works to take the property is still awaiting some funding approvals, but that is something that we are moving towards approval on. The second is to establish a revolving loan fund to assist low-income seniors rehab their homes so that they can stay in their home and continue to live there. And the third is to develop an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So the city was fortunate to continue to retain SB Friedman to do some work on the inclusionary zoning ordinance. It's not something that the city has had experience to date on, so we did look to their expertise. In the beginning, there was a lot of discussion about whether this program should be mandatory or voluntary. We started with a mandatory program, but there was just a lot of discomfort from our elected officials about having every single developer have to participate. So we began to look towards voluntary options to say, what can we do to encourage developers on their own to encourage some affordable units within their development? And I'll talk more about what that looks like. We did talk a lot about fee in lieu. It's always nice to be able to offer a fee in lieu option to a developer to say, if you don't want to build these units on site, you can give us a contribution and we can then apply that contribution elsewhere. The problem that we saw, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, we don't have a dedicated affordable housing staff or a housing staff at all. So if we're collecting money, we need to be able to identify where we can spend it. We need staff to spend that money, develop programs, things like that. And that's just not something that we were equipped to do at the time we discussed it. One thing that I thought was really cool about the program that we do have in place is that our consultant tested the incentives based on financial impact. So they didn't just say like, let's throw incentives and, you know, make this really sweet for the developer. They actually looked at a pro forma and said, based on market rate developments being approved in the city, what do we need to give people to make this make sense for them to include some affordable units without the city actually giving them cash or funding to do it. And then one last discussion point was to eliminate single family zoning as being eligible for the program that we put in place. We kind of went back and forth on this a lot. We talked about the fact that no program would ever allow someone to put a multifamily project on single family zoning, but there's just a lot of discomfort amongst the community that that could happen, or we're opening the door. And instead of losing the program overall, everyone agreed, let's just take that off the table for now and just move forward with focusing on multifamily and commercial development. So the final result that we had is a program that I think is fully customized to what the city of Naperville's preferences and policies were on this issue. And I'll talk a little bit about specifically what incentives we're offering. But one thing I just wanted to highlight is that our program actually offers 3 different affordability levels. I know sometimes the affordability is written as sort of what IDA defines as affordable. The city does have an incentive built around that, but we also then made a Naperville specific affordable and a Naperville specific attainable. So what we're saying is that, yes, there's definitely a need for true affordable housing, but we're happy to get any housing that increases some diversity and options beyond just market rate. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing that's unique, I think, to our program, is that we're offering different levels of affordability just to address the overall housing need. We know it's not just a true affordable need, it's sort of across the board. So as I mentioned, our program is not applicable to single family. It's only any property that could be developed with multifamily. And the reason I say that is because we are going to be working on our commercial zoning districts to allow multifamily as an accessory use within those districts. So eventually those would qualify as well. The property has to be able to be developed with at least 5 units to qualify. And that's just because there's going to be a lot of effort going into this program, and we didn't see that it would make a ton of sense to undertake that effort unless it's at least a 5-unit project. The program requires that at least 20% of the units be set aside as affordable. And again, that affordability, and you can see it in the chart here, it's at different levels. It's either true affordable as defined by IDA, Naperville affordable, or Naperville attainable. And obviously, as the chart also shows, 20% affordable is the minimum, and that defines how many incentives you qualify for. But if you go up to 40% of the units being affordable, your number of incentives also increases. So we're trying to build in some incentive to have more affordable units, but also if you have them truly more affordable, you get more incentives as well. So the program by right offers 100% density bonus. So if you could develop by the code 10 units on a property, this would allow you to automatically go to 20 units. That's not a zoning variance. That's not a public process. It's just an automatic waiver. And the reason I talk about that is that that's what we thought the incentive was. If we're not giving out money and we're not requiring this to be done, the way we thought to entice developers to use it is to eliminate some of the concerns that come through the public process, that not to eliminate public feedback, but there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the public process that might change the course of a development. So that was essentially the incentive that we thought was built in. There was definitely a lot of questions about that from our elected officials, a lot of discomfort looking at Patty. But I think that we also knew that the only way to counter that was to make the program mandatory, because with a mandatory program, you don't have to offer a lot of incentives. But there was also the concern about, the one size fit all not being appropriate as well. And then, so like I said, on top of that automatic density bonus, then you would have an eligibility for between 2 and 5 additional incentives, depending on what percentage of affordable you have and at what level. And then the following charts talk about the incentives that we're offering. So things like reducing setbacks, allowing for an increase in lot coverage, For parking is a big sticking point with a lot of our residential developments. The city requires 2.25 parking spaces per dwelling unit. We hear a lot that that's too much for especially a rental apartment. So we're proposing an automatic reduction in that requirement down to 1 space per bedroom. We're talking about an increase in building height by right. The city also has a brick requirement. If you want to move to the next chart, brick requirement for multifamily, just to sort of make sure that the development is quality. Obviously, brick adds a lot of cost to a project. So this was proposing to eliminate some of that brick requirement from a project. The city has school and park donations that are required for all residential developments. We did not propose to touch the school donation. Obviously, there's a, park is sometimes viewed as more optional, school is mandatory. So we left school in play. Park district, we were proposing a 25% reduction, but only if it was a cash donation. So if the park district identified a development as needing additional park space, that still had to be provided. It's just if they were taking a cash contribution, that could be reduced. The city also, to be fair, then proposed a reduction in our fees for the entitlement or permitting by 25% reduction. Park district and city are 2 different entities, so we're making sure that we're equitable in our fee reductions. And then the final item that we proposed is the PUD reduction. So that's like we have additional open space requirements for our PUD. PUDs are optional in the city, so we didn't want to penalize someone for using this process by then saying that you have to provide additional open space. So that was the final incentive offered. So where are we today? Our city council has endorsed the overall concept of the voluntary program. It took some time to get there, but I think at the end there was a unanimous vote in support of it. We are currently drafting the back half of the ordinance, and that's all of the technical requirements about occupancy and monitoring and restrictions and agreements and enforcement. Like I said before, the city doesn't have a dedicated housing staff. So this has been tough for us just in coming up with language that we know will work, for the development community, and that we know we have the manpower and technical knowledge to enforce. We already know going into this. So the program itself is not fully adopted. Once we get that back half of the ordinance done, it'll go back before the city council for a final vote. We do have a new mayor and several new council people since this program was initially reviewed, so there could be some revisiting of that. But we already know going into it that we've heard from some market rate developers that some of the things that we're requiring through this program will be a struggle for them. Like I said, 30-year commitment that the units identified as affordable stay as affordable. We are requiring that 30-year commitment be applied, whether it's resale or rental. We think the rental is obviously much easier to achieve because it's checking income at time of signing. But when you're talking about preventing or prohibiting how much a home can resell for after the initial buyer, that gets a lot trickier, like I said, especially for a market rate developer. And income verification, even on the rental, the market rate developers don't feel super comfortable with because it's just not something they do regularly. I said this many times, but we have no dedicated housing staff. It's just a challenge that I think it needs to be acknowledged. There's definitely a knowledge that we don't have in-house and also time, right, to monitor and make sure that we're doing things the right way. Like I said, I think collecting money from us is a great idea, but we need someone to be able to spend it. We need to figure out where it should go, what property can be purchased. So that's something that can be a challenge. And then when we're doing the research on these inclusionary zoning ordinances, we talk to places like Lake Forest or Evanston. They have regional housing trust funds, which is a really good option, I think, for cities. And I wish we had one locally where they kind of pool all the resources that cities are collecting and then figure out where to spend and how to do it. And I think that's a really nice option that is offered in other counties currently or regions currently that sort of helps cities that are, I think, in the same boat as Naperville with just not having that in-house expertise to implement. That was a really quick overview. Does anyone have any questions?
Member Guston.
Allison, thank you so much for your presentation. I know that was years in the making and you
Yes.
made it very quick and precise, and I appreciate that. And you always do such a wonderful job. One quick question, though, maybe would be helpful for all of us when we talk affordable. Affordable comes in many different forms. There seems to be a lot of different ideas as to what affordable is. Can you share with us HUD's affordable calculations and how it reflected or was not reflecting what affordable in Naperville was or is, and why Naperville went to its own calculation on what affordable was.
Yes. So Naperville has been on the APA list, that's the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act, where they require cities to have at least 10% of their housing be affordable. We've been on the list for falling below that 10%. I think the last 3 times it was issued. And actually we went from, I think, originally we were at like 6% affordable, and then we went all the way up to 9.5 and then went back down to 7.6%. And so we spent a lot of time sort of digging into what those numbers were and why it would change so much. And we found what we think is a significant flaw in the calculation. And it's complicated, and I can give more information to anyone that needs it, but essentially it's the way that the property tax is factored in. It is not equivalent to the purchase price. When you can figure out what's affordable based on how much your income is and what percentage you're spending on housing, it factors in home purchase price, but also property taxes and things like your the money that you pay if you don't have 20% down on your loan. Yes, thank you. All of those things factor into what you can ultimately pay for in a house. So when we looked closer at the numbers, I think the property tax assumptions that IDA was using was equivalent to a $400,000 plus home. But then the amount that they said our residents could afford was in the $190,000 category. So they were paying like, I don't know, $5,000 in property taxes on a 191,000 square foot or $191,000 home. So that to us was like a fatal flaw of how their calculation was done. And when we tried to rerun the numbers using some assumptions of what that property tax should be, the city was well over the 10% threshold. So at that point, I think we started to say, those numbers are a little bit strange. What can we do that's more realistic to what we know is happening in Naperville? And that was how SB Friedman kind of pulled those numbers to say, you know, Naperville affordable is based on Naperville median area income, but also that realistic sort of property tax assumption so that it's not moving that number so far down that it's unrealistic to hit in the city. Does that make sense?
Any other questions? Okay. All right, well,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Okay. I just want to thank our presenters for coming in. Lots of great information. Paul, did you want to come up and say anything? Yeah.
Thank you to our presenters today. Just a little idea of moving forward. This group was our last group that we had scheduled. We'd like to take at least a month off and allow staff to develop sort of a toolkit for the board members. We'll be putting all of these presentations together and a lot of the information together and then putting them into tables so that you can get an idea of the various issues that we have discussed with the various presenters, both at the very beginning when IDA came in and then when staff presented, and also some of the potential solutions that are out there. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring Naperville in here at the end is that Naperville is one of the communities in DuPage County. We brought a few people to you from the collar counties that have programs. Naperville is one of the few communities in the county that has started to develop some of the things that we've already been talking about. So our idea here is to put a toolkit together for you all and then come back and talk about that toolkit. I can tell you that since we have started this process, we have a lot of interest from municipalities talking with us about programs that they're doing. We're actually engaging in a few communities and helping them potentially with some of their programs. You'll likely be seeing some intergovernmental agreements coming forward where we are working with communities on some of their projects. The other thing that's been very intriguing about this and very satisfying is that we have a lot of developers coming forward and talking to staff about projects similar to what Pulte is doing in Naperville, where Naperville didn't have a program in place, but Pulte essentially said, we'll come forward, we'll go through the entitlement process, we'll develop the program. And we think that is worthy enough, even without a program in place to go through the process. We have a few developers that are going to be doing that in DuPage County, and you'll be seeing some entitlement programs coming through the Zoning Board of Appeals that will include workforce housing as a component of market rate development. And we'll be seeing that this year sometime. We've had several meetings with developers where they have talked with us about interest in not only on this program, but also, once again, in actually doing something with the county on their own. One of the things that we hear throughout this entire process is one of the elements that is very difficult to develop is the sustainability portion of the housing workforce housing programs. We've got some developers coming in where they are proposing management companies within their own development that will handle that sustainability in the absence of a local government having that at this point. One of the things you heard from Naperville is that from a government standpoint, it's very difficult for a local government to create that sort of housing authority to manage and monitor and then make those units sustainable in the long term. But that's one of the things that we'll certainly be talking to you as part of our toolkit, and we've talked about that before. But the nice thing about this whole program is that I think you've gotten a lot of good information. Once again, we'll put that toolkit together here in the next month for you all. But you will start to see developers coming in through the zoning entitlement process that will have elements of their programs where they're in some instances it might be completely workforce or affordable or attainable housing, but you'll start to see some of those developments coming through the zoning process, irrespective of whether or not the county has a program in place yet. And then the final thing I'll say is that Mary and I have been working with Grounded Solutions Network. We had our kickoff meeting last week, and we'll be meeting every month with Grounded Solutions to start to develop this to take the things we've learned and create our own toolkit, but actually start to develop a program. We can start to put some of these things in place. We can tell you that we are in the cohort now. It's Mecklenburg County, which is essentially Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's also the city of Chicago. Originally thought it was going to be another community in the Southwest, but that group couldn't come in on this cohort, but it's going to be the city of Chicago. So the three of us working with Ground Solutions have already begun the process of gathering data and analyzing that data, and then starting to talk about how we can start to build a housing program from the ground floor up. And that we anticipate that we'll start to see fruits of that labor in the spring. But that doesn't preclude us or foreclose on us from moving forward with private developers coming in and asking for zoning relief, and certainly some of the things that we can do to put the toolkit together for you guys to review. Mary, do you have anything that you'd like to say?
I just want to make a couple more comments on the sustainability issue. So you may have noticed this morning, I know Member Guston noticed that in the head count, there is a position for a housing and community development planner that's included in the housing solutions budget. The idea there is that, so unlike Naperville, we do have housing staff because we manage the home affordable housing program. And so we have staff who are well-versed in monitoring the long-term affordability of rental properties and resale of some single-family homes. But those folks only work on federal grants, and they can only, and we don't have the capacity in that unit to expand our sort of portfolio. So the idea is that by adding an additional planner, we'll increase the capacity of that particular unit of folks who do have expertise in managing the long-term sustainability of affordable housing. So what we'll need to decide, though, is what exactly is the program. And I think the question about the $5 million, there's a huge variety of ways that we can use it, with the caveat being for the state's attorney is what can we currently do within our jurisdictional, within our statutory authority, and what might require either a partnership or some sort of change in legislation. So those were just the additional comments I wanted to add.
I think also one of the things that you heard today from Naperville is that Naperville is a community that is sort of on the forefront of many things that we've seen in this county. And yet they say that they just don't have the ability to sort of create staffing for their own housing program. One of the things that that this whole process has allowed us to do is have communities reach out to the county and say, you know, we can potentially partner and maybe there could be an opportunity for the county to be that regional housing group that supports municipalities in their efforts to do attainable workforce and affordable housing. So this whole discussion has really blossomed into many discussions with municipalities and private groups in the private sector as well. So I think the reason I offer that is that I know that when we first started this, we wanted to start building housing units. And what we found is that it's very difficult to do and sustain. But at the very least, this exercise has allowed other communities and other agencies to reach out to us and start to have bigger, bolder conversations about building and sustaining and scaling housing, not only in the unincorporated area, but throughout the entire county and municipality. So it's been very, very helpful. So that's the idea of moving forward with you all. And like I say, we anticipate that either in December or the first part of next year, we would like to get back with you all and show you some of the things that we've developed in this toolkit and talk with you a little bit more about where we're at with Grounded Solution Network. And once again, in the meantime, you will likely see some development coming in that includes various iterations of workforce housing and market rate developments.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul and Mary. Thank you very much. Yeah. And, I think whatever we can do to encourage our oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. So Paul, I actually received, I had a conversation with a constituent from Oak Brook Terrace who said that there was some rumor, or he had maybe heard, he's actually an alderman there, that in unincorporated DuPage and Oak Brook Terrace, that you guys are looking at land there, at purchasing that land for specifically affordable housing plans. Do you happen to know if there's any credence to that?
So there's been no conversation with the county is looking to purchase land yet. The only conversations that we've had openly and actually, with staff and openly is us discussing the neighborhood revitalization clean and lean program, where we are able to obtain some land through the foreclosure process because we have cleaned the property, liened it, and foreclosed on the lien. We've actually, because of this program, had 3 properties that have been donated to us because banks, rather than putting them on the tax block, have donated the land to us. I can tell you that there is development in unincorporated Oak Brook Terrace that is one of our larger developments that's been entitled since 2012 for over 2,000 dwelling units plus an additional 500 senior dwelling units. And there has been some interest in developing housing and workforce housing from the private sector as part of that already entitled development. But it's not something where the county has been looking at buying any of the land or anything like that. So that's probably where that is coming from.
Okay, I have one more question, if that's okay. So, and then I do have another person who's approached me with regard, they're from Fair Hope Housing. And she wants to make sure that, I don't know if there should be a presentation to the group. You guys are probably very familiar with that organization, but I think she wanted to make sure that their policies and in what they really care about, obviously, and non-discriminatory practices would also be a part of, the plan or the toolbook that you've got going on.
Absolutely. I can tell you that with Grounded Solution Networks, their organization started out more in the realm of housing for underserved communities. In this particular program, there's been a cohort already that Ground Solution Network has dealt with. And that cohort was really dealing with communities of color and folks who have been kept out of the housing market. So their focus is along those lines, which I think is consistent with what you're talking about, but it also has something that is important to what we're talking about here, and that is production and scalability of housing. So it's not only dealing with that side of housing, but it's also dealing with sort of the missing middle housing. So with our Grounded Solution Networks, we're very in tune with both elements of that lack of housing. So that is part of our program right now.
I'll just add that as a recipient of HUD funds, both CDBG and home, the county has an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. So that absolutely is a, that's a mandatory requirement of the county.
Thank you, Member Rutledge.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple questions, Paul. I guess first is, as part of our toolkit, will we get a listing of county-owned properties that might be suitable for this kind of development? Second question is, once we get through, we get this toolkit. I particularly enjoyed the strategic planning brainstorming session. And so I guess I'm wondering if that would be something that we're going to kind of move towards once we've got all of this information in front of us. And then my third question is probably a Connor question. Is any of this more difficult or easier if we were home rule?
That one. It's been a while, sorry. Things are always easier if you're home rule, generally speaking. But for a variety of reasons, the county isn't a home rule entity. So a lot of what's discussed is probably going to require some legislative action.
So just to piggyback on that, one of the things that we've talked about is that home rule will be a lot easier. There's going to have to potentially be some need for legislation, but there's also the opportunity to partner with home rule communities potentially. Well, that's where Chicago and maybe some of the city of Aurora, but there's some opportunities there to partner. So we've explored some of those things. As it relates to county-owned property, we have a list of all property that the county owns, and also that we've gotten through Clean and Lean that we own. One of the things we want to be very mindful is we don't want to share that publicly because we don't want to increase the value of that property. But that's certainly something that will be in the toolkit. And relative to the strategic planning process, that might be an option that allows a little bit more free form of discussion rather than coming back at a public meeting where at our next iteration of this, where we actually lay out all of these tools and we have a different type of venue to discuss all those things. But that's something we could talk to the county board folks about.
Sorry. I guess I'm asking a clarifying question on your strategic planning. So I know at your session, affordable housing was one of, yeah. And then we had a full day where we sort of fleshed out a number of those concepts. So obviously that was one that we discussed. And so there will be a component when the draft comes back that includes some discussion of housing. So I guess my question to you is, were you referring more as the sort of that workshopping process, or were you asking if it's going to be incorporated into the strategic plan? Was it a process or a product question? Not that it would be included in the strategic plan, but I just enjoyed that process, brainstorming, right. And that, we came up with great ideas, and right. And your presentations have all been terrific, and it's great information for us. But I guess I'm kind of looking at this process going, okay, where's our input at? Yeah, I think we would welcome that opportunity to just sort of have that kind of exchange of ideas once we've, so, we had to work through this process of sort of, here's kind of the basic education. Here's the things that we can and can't do. Here's the things that others are doing. Now, what do you think? Like, where should we go from here? So I think to Paul's point about putting together a toolkit, then you got to figure out what you're building and which tools you're going to be using. So.
Thank you, Member Rutledge. Member Guston.
Thank you very much. And yeah, though we're not home rule, there are things we can do. I mean, we can streamline the process a lot of times, and we can do an incentive program, a voluntary incentive program, and make things move forward. So we do have some additional tools in our shed that we can actually implement now versus trying to change legislation in Springfield. Thank you.
Okay. Municipalities and encouraging them as well goes well with this mission of the committee. So yeah, Sam, any closing comments?
Yes, I got a million of them, but I won't bore you with them. I think what we've learned throughout the process is that there's a lot more to this than getting a hammer and nails and start building buildings. It can be complicated, it can be varied. We can have, you know, affordability, we can have affordable housing comes in many stages. I was just doing the math. Down payment assistance is very popular at IDA right now. They've got a number of different down payment assistance programs for people who are buying homes and getting maybe $10,000 up front. And that's forgiven over a period of time, which makes it much easier for people to buy that. And even if we were to take, just think about it, I just thought about it. We have $5 million in theory, we're going to have $5 million. If we wanted to give any potential purchaser $10,000 for a down payment assistance, we could help 500 people. That's it. And we wouldn't have to do anything else, but other than say, if you could meet the qualifications, here's $10,000 to help you. So we're so far ahead of the game than we were 6 months ago. We're making significant progress. And as Paul said, you know, affordability can mean an entirely affordable project. It can mean 100 units and 10 can be affordable. So there's so many different things. I like the workshop idea. In my perfect world, we get all of this information, get our toolkit, digest it for a month or two, and then spend a Saturday or whatever it took with the entire board or whoever wants to be a participant and kick the tires on it. So then we can decide what we want to do. Because until we have all the information, we really don't know what we want to or what we can do. So I thank you to the presenters, thank you to Mary, thank you, Paul, and all of us who participated. We've made significant progress on. I'm very happy with what we're doing. So.
Okay, great. Do we have any other old business? Any other new business? Can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, all in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.